March 17, 1943, at Tirpitz Ufer 76-78 in Berlin, the headquarters of the Abwehr, a folder slammed onto a mahogany desk with such force that it sent a shockwave across the polished surface. Coffee splashed from Admiral Wilhelm Canaris's porcelain cup, staining intelligence reports so sensitive that their discovery by the Gestapo would mean certain execution. Impossible, the chief of German military intelligence whispered to the empty room. The Americans are feeding us propaganda through turned agents. Through the tall windows, he could see the dark waters of the Landwehr Canal, a silent witness to the brutal fates of Germany's past enemies. But the document he now held in his trembling hands posed a far greater threat. This single report didn't just contradict Nazi propaganda. It challenged the entire mathematical foundation of a German victory. The document on Canaris's desk wasn't just about an aircraft. It was about arguably the most complex machine ever created at that time. To comprehend the shock, you must first comprehend the machine. The consolidated B-24 Liberator was no simple fighter. It was an 18-ton flying fortress, a city of interlocking parts designed to fly thousands of miles and deliver annihilation. Each bomber was assembled from 1.5 million individual parts. Its airframe was stitched together by 450,000 rivets, and its systems were comprised of over 30,000 separate components. For massive engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, had to be perfectly mounted to carry 8,000 pounds of bombs in its twin bays. To the meticulous German engineering mind, this was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, a monumental object to be constructed over months. The report, however, claimed this titan was rolling off an assembly line faster than Germany could produce a simple military vehicle. This wasn't just propaganda, it was a mathematical absurdity. For the leaders of the Third Reich, the production figures coming out of America weren't just unbelievable. They were heretical. They struck against an ideological wall built on a set of core, unshakable beliefs about the United States. This worldview, which had become an article of faith within the Nazi high command, saw American power as a complete illusion. First, they believed that American democracy made the country inherently weak and inefficient, incapable of the unified will required for total war. Second, they were convinced that America's diverse, mongrel population lacked the discipline and racial purity needed for high-tech, precision manufacturing. In their eyes, Americans were a decadent society of consumers, brilliant at making refrigerators and razor blades, but utterly incapable of producing advanced military aircraft. As Hermann Göring confidently told Hitler just days after Pearl Harbor, they cannot possibly produce what they claim. To accept the numbers from Willow Run would have meant accepting that their entire worldview was wrong. It would mean that democracy wasn't weak, that diversity wasn't inefficient, and that they had started a war they were mathematically guaranteed to lose. With the ideological wall standing firm in Berlin, the first cracks began to appear over 5,000 miles away. The source was Mexico City, a neutral nation during the war and therefore a bustling, shadowy hotbed of international espionage. It was a place where secrets were currency, and the Abwehr's chief banker was a spymaster named George Nicholas. His strategy was brilliantly simple. He didn't need to send agents into the heart of America. He let the heart of America come to him. Nicholas and his team cultivated sources among the American businessmen and oil executives who traveled freely between the industrial engine of Detroit and the oil fields of Mexico. At lavish receptions and private dinners hosted by groups like the German-Mexican Commerce Association, these men would talk. Fueled by tequila and pride, they spoke of the industrial miracles they were witnessing back home, completely unaware that their casual dinner conversations were being meticulously transcribed by German agents. The most devastating intelligence wasn't stolen, it was offered freely. On the night of February 3, 1943, this abstract strategy produced a piece of tangible, devastating intelligence. At a reception, an American oil executive named Harold Morrison, his tongue loosened by several tequilas, began to boast about a recent investor's tour he had taken of the Willow Run facility. Listening with polite interest was Wolfgang Blau, an Abwehr agent posing as an Argentine leather merchant, who quietly memorized every single word. "Gentlemen," Morrison slurred, "what I saw defies all description. The assembly line is over a mile long." He described a building so vast that clouds would form near the ceiling, sometimes even raining lightly on the workers below. Then, in a moment of pure, unadulterated pride, Morrison pulled a pencil from his pocket and grabbed a cocktail napkin. As the German agent watched, the executive began to sketch. His frantic lines revealed the very Instead, Sorensen explained, "You move the aircraft past stationary workers." Ford had broken the bomber's complex assembly down into 60,000 separate, simplified operations. Each worker performed the same task over and over, achieving mastery and incredible speed through repetition. He was giving a masterclass on the logic of American industrial power, unaware every word was a piece of intelligence destined for the German high command. If the production method was a shock, Sorensen's description of the workforce was a direct assault on the core tenets of Nazi ideology. When Ungria asked about the immense challenge of finding enough skilled workers, Sorensen explained how Ford solved the problem by simply utilizing everyone. The Willow Run plant employed over 42,000 workers, with women comprising nearly 40% of the entire workforce. Sorensen explained that these women were often better at detailed work, with smaller hands for tight spaces and more patience for repetitive tasks. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her children was now installing hydraulic lines in the tail section of a B-24 Liberator. Furthermore, he proudly stated that thousands of African-American workers were operating some of the most sophisticated machinery in the plant. This was the detail that was truly indigestible in Berlin. To accept the intelligence from Willow Run meant accepting that the so-called weaker sex and the races they deemed inferior were not just cogs in a machine. They were the engine of it. This diverse, mongrel workforce was outproducing the German master race by an order of magnitude, a truth more devastating than any bomb. The intelligence from Mexico and Washington did not exist in a vacuum. It was merely the beginning of an avalanche, as confirming reports began flooding into the Abwehr from a web of independent channels across the globe, all telling the same unbelievable story. A Swedish engineer named Erik Lundberg, after visiting the plant, sent a report stating it operated with an efficiency that defies European understanding, backed by a staggering capital investment of some $200 million for tooling alone. Even more damning was a coded message from a Japanese commander, Toshikazu Omi, which was intercepted by German intelligence. Reporting to his own superiors in Tokyo, his assessment was chillingly clear: this single factory produces more aircraft monthly than the entire Japanese aviation industry. From Turkish diplomats to Argentine businessmen, the data poured in. By April of 1943, German intelligence had assembled reports from 17 independent sources, all confirming Willow Run's impossible production rate. It was no longer a rumor or a boast. It was one of the most thoroughly verified facts of the Second World War. Faced with a mountain of verified intelligence from 17 independent sources, but with the ideological wall in Berlin standing as firm as ever, Admiral Canaris made a final, desperate gamble. He authorized Operation Pastorius. On the surface, it was a daring sabotage mission. 2 teams of German agents would be landed by U-boat on the American coast, tasked with destroying key industrial targets like factories and railroads. But Canaris gave the mission's leader, an Americanized German named George John Dash, a set of secret, overriding orders. Before any sabotage was to be attempted, their true primary mission was to gather irrefutable, physical proof of America's aircraft production. Canaris no longer wanted reports. He wanted ground truth. He tasked them with acquiring photographs, employee counts, and railroad shipping records, anything that would force Göring and Hitler to accept the horrifying reality. He was risking a major covert operation not to damage the American war machine, but to hold up a mirror to his own delusional leadership. Canaris's desperate gamble was a catastrophic failure. On June 13, 1942, George Dash's team landed on Long Island. But having lived in America for 20 years before the war, Dash was tormented by the futility of his mission and quickly surrendered to the FBI. It was during his interrogation that he made a revelation that stunned his American captors. He wasn't just a saboteur. He was an intelligence courier on a mission for proof. Canaris himself told me that Berlin doesn't believe your production figures, Dash explained. They think Willow Run is propaganda. The FBI agents were incredulous. They don't believe we're producing a bomber an hour? One asked. Dash laughed bitterly. Agent, I lived here. I've seen your automobile factories, he replied. I tried to tell them that if Ford could produce a car every minute before the war, they could produce a bomber an hour during it. They accused me of being a defeatist. In a stunning reversal, the enemy agent had just confirmed the German High Command's total, systemic disconnect from reality. On April 20, 1943, Hitler's 54th birthday, the dramatic climax arrived. Admiral Canaris traveled to Carenhall, Hermann Göring's ostentatious hunting estate, for a direct confrontation with the head of the Luftwaffe. Across a massive oak table, Canaris laid out his mountain of evidence: photographs, intercepted documents, and reports from 17 independent sources. He presented them like a dealer showing a hand of cards that would lose the game. Reichsmarshal Canaris stated carefully, the Ford Willow Run plant is producing one B-24 Liberator every hour. Göring, weighing over 280 pounds by this point, picked up a photograph showing the assembly line stretching into the distance. Canaris, he sneered with contempt, do you take me for a fool? These are obviously wooden mock-ups, propaganda. He declared the plant probably produced 50 bombers monthly at most. Desperate, Canaris produced an intercepted railroad manifest. It showed the plant consumed 16 million pounds of aluminum per month, more than Germany's entire national production. Göring laughed harshly. And where do they get this aluminum? From their Negro workers? From their women riveters? He mocked. Canaris, you've been deceived. The meeting was over. The hard evidence had been arrogantly and completely rejected. A week after the confrontation with Göring, Admiral Canaris was summoned to the Wolf's Lair to present his findings to the Führer himself. The atmosphere was tense. Hitler and his generals, including Jodl and Keitel, were deep in planning Operation Citadel, the massive summer offensive on the Eastern Front, and listened with palpable impatience. Knowing he was risking his life, Canaris made his case one last time. He explained that if the American production numbers were true, the coming aerial bombardment would soon exceed all of Germany's defensive capabilities. Hitler's response was not based on military calculation, but on pure ideological dogma. Admiral, he said characteristically, the Americans are capable of mass production of simple goods, automobiles, refrigerators, but a bomber is not a car. He insisted that building a bomber required precision, skill, and dedication, qualities he believed the American mongrel society lacked. His final verdict was simple: it's impossible. When General Jodl cautiously suggested that even if they accepted just 1/4 of the figures, the situation was dire, Hitler cut him off instantly. The figures are false, he snapped. The highest authority had spoken. Reality had been officially outlawed. This was the point of no return. Unknown to the Nazi leadership, Admiral Canaris had one final, secret piece of evidence that was more powerful than any report or photograph: actual film footage. Smuggled from Switzerland via a Spanish diplomatic pouch, he possessed 5 minutes of film from inside the Willow Run plant. In a locked room in Abwehr headquarters, he and his deputy Hans Oster watched it. The camera moved down the entire mile-long assembly line, showing B-24s in every stage of construction moving at a steady, relentless pace. A clock visible in several shots confirmed the timing, while men, women, black and white workers performed their tasks with mechanical precision. "My God," Oster whispered in the darkness. "It's true." Canaris's response was not one of triumph. Instead, he calmly took out his cigarette lighter and set the film reel ablaze, watching the undeniable proof burn into ash. "We cannot show this to them," he explained to his deputy. "They would accuse us of creating fake footage or being traitors." He held the ultimate truth in his hands and knew that in a system that had rejected reality, showing it would not save Germany, it would only get them killed. While Hitler and Göring lived in denial, the truth was not a mystery to everyone in the Third Reich's inner circle. One man understood the numbers perfectly: Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and the only high-ranking Nazi with a genuine understanding of industrial production. After secretly obtaining the Abwehr's intelligence on Willow Run, Speer saw the horrifying reality with perfect clarity. His private diary entry from May 15, 1943, discovered after the war, reveals his silent despair. "If the Willow Run figures are even half accurate," he wrote, "we face not defeat but annihilation. They produce more aircraft in a month than we do in a year." But his entry ends with a chilling admission explaining his public silence. "I cannot speak this truth. To do so would be my death warrant." The one man who could have confirmed the intelligence was trapped, proving that the truth was not only unwelcome, it was fatal. By early 1944, the time for arguing over reports was over. Reality, so long denied in the halls of power, could no longer be ignored. The reckoning began on February 20, 1944, when the American 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, an offensive that would become known as Big Week. For 6 consecutive days, over 1,000 heavy bombers at a time pounded German aircraft factories, dropping more tonnage of bombs than the Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire Blitz. The wooden mock-ups Hermann Göring had scoffed at were now real, and they were blotting out the sun over the Reich. The truth that was rejected in Berlin was now being confirmed confirmed by the pilots desperately trying to fight back. Legendary Luftwaffe fighter ace Adolf radioed Göring directly from the cockpit, his voice strained with disbelief. Reichsmarschall, I've counted over 800 bombers in a single formation. These planes are real, and they're dropping real bombs. The mathematical prophecy Canaris had tried to deliver was finally arriving, not as a report, but as a sky full of American steel. The Allied bombs raining from the sky were a brutal validation of Admiral Canaris's work, but the truth would not save him. As the reckoning began in February 1944, Canaris was removed from his command, accused of the very defeatism he had tried to prevent. His final, tragic fate came just weeks before the utter collapse of the Third Reich. On April 9, 1945, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was executed by the regime he had tried to warn. His loyal deputy, Hans Oster, met the same end on the same day. They were murdered as the inevitable outcome they had foretold was finally coming to pass. Their crime was not a failure of intelligence. Their crime was an unwavering insistence on reporting an unwelcome reality. They paid the ultimate price not for being wrong, but for being right at a time when the truth was the most dangerous contraband in Germany. After the war, with the archives open and the survivors free to speak, the final, undeniable verdict of history was rendered. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed every staggering detail Canaris had reported. Willow Run alone produced 8,685 B-24s. The peak production of 650 aircraft monthly was real, and the bomber-an-hour rate was sustained for months. Even more damning was the testimony of the surviving German intelligence officers. At Nuremberg, Walter Schellenberg testified, "We knew the truth about American production by early 1943, but to report this truth was to risk execution for defeatism." Another officer, Hans Gisevius, wrote the perfect epitaph for their struggle. "The tragedy was not that we lacked intelligence about American production. We were drowning in it." Historians now agree this was one of the most consequential intelligence failures in history. It wasn't a failure of collection. The spies did their job perfectly. It was a catastrophic failure of acceptance by a leadership that refused to believe any fact that contradicted their cherished ideology. In the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, American officers discovered a final German intelligence report on Willow Run. Dated April 20th, Hitler's last birthday, its words served as a damning epitaph for the entire regime. "Germany dies not from lack of intelligence," the unknown author wrote, "but from lack of wisdom to believe intelligence that contradicts what we wish to be true. Let future generations learn. Reality does not bend to ideology. Mathematics does not yield to mythology. Truth ignored becomes tragedy." In the end, Willow Run built more than just bombers. It built proof that democracy, diversity, and freedom could be forged into the most formidable industrial weapon on Earth. The German spies had counted every plane. Their leaders believed none of it. And that disbelief killed the Third Reich as surely as any bomb, leaving a timeless warning that reality doesn't care what you believe. It will win in the end.